Hi, everyone. Welcome to our latest edition of SuperNova Commencements. I am your host, Kashi Sehgal, and we are broadcasting live all over the internet today. Just as always, had a little bit of feedback, but anyways, fix that. So we're broadcasting live, Facebook, on Twitter, on YouTube, on Twitch, so you can find us kind of everywhere. All right, so today we have a very special show. We are talking about all things international. So in our Your Career Powered by Data segment, which is brought to us by our Steppingblocks partner, we are going to focus on international affairs. So let me tell you a little bit about what I could find on the platform. So the most common educational background for international affairs is a degree in international relations. That makes sense, I think. Also, there are about 78,000 people in the United States who are in this industry. So not one of the bigger industries that we've seen, but still pretty cool. The average age of the industry is 39. And the female ratio is about 58%. There are also about 3% veterans that make up the workforce. So that's cool. Top skills: international relations, obviously makes sense. Policy analysis, you do a lot of policy work, and international development. International development also makes you a lot of money, apparently, as a skill. So does capacity building, so does public policy. And we always talk about the schools that a lot of the professionals come from. I have to give a shout out. Number one on the list was my alma mater, the George Washington University. So shout out to GW, go Colonials. All right. Also, American University and Georgetown, all of which are in DC. That makes sense. After that, University of Maryland. And then fifth on the list is Harvard. So I just had to throw that in there that GW outranks Harvard, at least in something. Okay. So that is all about the career that we're chatting about today. I am going to now bring on our very special guest, very distinguished. Let me bring her on screen. Ambassador Mary Ann Peters, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Kashi. It's great to be here.
We are excited to have you. And everyone, let me just tell you who Ambassador Peters is. Obviously, she's an ambassador, or she was. She was the former United States ambassador to Bangladesh, which is really cool. And she was also the past chief executive officer at the Carter Center. She also teaches at Georgia State. She's doing all kinds of really cool things. So we're really, really pleased to have her today. Ambassador Peters, could you please kick us off and tell us where you're from, where did you go to school, and what did you major in?
Well, I'm from all over. I often say I'm from suburbia, I'm afraid, boring as that sounds. My dad worked for a large corporation and we moved around a lot. My mom was a speech therapist, so we moved around a fair bit. But I went to high school in Grand Rapids, Michigan, and college in California at a small liberal arts school called Santa Clara University, where I majored in history and French. And then I went to graduate school at one of the Washington, D.C. based graduate schools that is known for providing candidates for our diplomatic corps, the U.S. Foreign Service, which is what I did for the first chunk of my career. And that was the Johns Hopkins School of Advanced International Studies. So I have a master's in international studies. But as an undergraduate, I did study abroad in France. And by the way, I'm happy to say that these days, the opportunities for study abroad are so much broader than they were when I did it. Just about everybody went to Europe back in the day, but now you can really get interesting and enlightening experiences by studying abroad in other parts of the world.
Absolutely. And study abroad is a great tool at your university if they have it. So make use. Okay, Ambassador Peters, could you please walk us through your career trajectory, high level? So you left Johns Hopkins and you're now where you are today, having been at the Carter Center, giving back to students by teaching and leading the working with the policy studies school at Georgia State. So how did you get from point A to point Z?
Well, the Foreign Service is almost unique in the U.S. government. It's a cadre of people who, kind of like the military, are come in a competitive process, and they come in as what are called junior officers, and they rise through the ranks in this professional cadre. And I always tell students who might be interested in a career as a diplomat representing the United States, and I'll tell you later, if Kashi gives me the chance, why that's great. But if you're interested, look at careers at state.gov, because of course the State Department is the foreign ministry of the United States, and it runs the Foreign Service, which, as I said, is the professional group of diplomats. And so I started out just out of graduate school. By the way, it would be difficult to do that today. If you want to join the Foreign Service, it's probably best, because it's highly competitive, to do something kind of cool in your 20s. Peace Corps, military, start a soup kitchen in Peoria, something kind of cool to get their attention. But anyway, I was lucky and I started right out of graduate school. And so you do different kinds of jobs as you climb the ladder within the Foreign Service. So I started out in Germany, but my second job was in Burma, which is now called Myanmar. And the Foreign Service taught me to speak Burmese, which meant that I had the privilege of really getting to know people in what was then Burma. And of course, right now, given what's happening there, I have a great deal of sympathy for them. But that Germany was great. As I said, that was my first assignment. But being a junior officer, and in fact, I was the last consul in Mandalay, Burma. I folded the flag and closed the post many years ago. Well, I'll tell you, it was 1980. That started really my love affair with the Foreign Service. So I ended up staying in the Foreign Service for 30 years, a little more than that, rising, gradually going through the ranks and doing more and more, managerial and policy roles at the State Department. I can go into that later if you want. And then after that, I decided it was time to try something else. So I ended up doing a couple of jobs in the professional education sphere. And that's, in my case, professional education for people in the national security space. And that generally includes the military, the State Department, the intelligence services. And so I worked for a couple of years as dean of a school in Germany. And then I became the provost of the United States Naval War College, which is a graduate school in Newport, Rhode Island, that grants a degree in national security and strategic studies. And from there, I was recruited to go to the Carter Center. So I compressed it into as few words as possible, Kashi. That's the general trajectory.
Yeah, quite a bit to condense. Okay, let's just dive right into your background. And first of all, I just want to highlight for students the fact that she said you really need to do something cool to get into a career in foreign service these days. And the cool things she all mentioned involved service. So service to your country, service to maybe another country, service to a group who really could use your assistance. So all of those things, service is cool, in other words.
It is. Yep.
Okay.
Yep. And it might get you a paid job at the State Department.
There you go. There you go. All right. So I just had to pull that little tidbit out before we really dive in. Okay. So many people who study international studies in school go on to business, right? They do international business. Why did you choose foreign relations and foreign service as your career, your first career? And what was appealing about that type of career to you?
Well, the opportunity to actually live and work overseas for a significant percentage of my professional life was what really appealed. If you're in international business, you may very well serve overseas, although that's less and less true. Most multinational companies these days choose people from the country where they're operating to head those particular operations. And the people at headquarters who know about international business, may travel and do a lot of work in strategizing for the business's growth overseas. But in my experience, you're less and less likely to find an American executive serving as the head of operations in a country overseas. And even when I made this decision back in the day, it was easier to imagine myself working in embassies overseas, because what happens in the State Department is that you typically spend time between 2 and 4 years at embassies overseas. In between, if you want to, you go back to Washington to hold some of the policy jobs that are there, and then maybe you get another post somewhere else. And the precise rhythm of those assignments depends on your individual preferences and on the needs of the service, which is always the top priority. You have to be available to go worldwide. And if you want to go to Paris and they want you to go somewhere else, say Baghdad or Kabul, you go to Baghdad or Kabul. So but still, it was very, very appealing to me when I got out of graduate school to represent the country. And I will say that one of the biggest thrills about this job is the opportunity to speak for the United States of America. I mean, I can't think of anything cooler. And in some countries, they still have the tradition, and I know this is a really small part of what makes the Foreign Service such a wonderful career. But in many countries, the representatives of foreign nations fly the flag of their country on their car. And we still did that in Bangladesh when I was there. And I still remember the thrill I got when I saw the flag of the United States flying up on the front bumper of my car. So that's what's cool about it.
So we've heard what's cool about it. What is the role of an ambassador? And how can the concepts that you use as an ambassador be applied to life for most people, students in particular?
Well, first of all, I will say that not all Foreign Service officers become ambassadors because we're a big country.
Only the best.
Well, yeah, and I hope so, but I would say that means you have to enjoy the journey, because even if you're very good, sometimes there are political issues or just bad luck that can get in your way, on the rise to be ambassador. So there are many great Foreign Service officers who never reached the rank of ambassador, but who had fulfilling careers and made a real difference to the United States. That's the first thing I would say. You have to really want the journey as well as the destination. But what embassies do, and ambassadors are the kind of spokespeople of the embassies, they have two major roles. One is to advocate for the United States and for the foreign policy of the United States where they serve. And the other is to make sure Washington understands the local context. So many Foreign Service officers during the decades before they might become ambassadors spend their time getting to know the people, and they write what we used to call cables, but they're now emails, of course, classified, but they're emails, on what's going on politically. Who are the political opposition parties? Who are the important factors in civil society? What's the economy like? What are their exports? What are their problems? What are the roles of women? Do they have minority problems? Is it a democracy? What factors are threatening the democracy? And that, by the way, is a very important theme right now as we see democracy, frankly, ebbing around the world. So, but ambassadors basically speak in public about what the United States would like a country to do in certain ways, and they also manage the manage the embassy.
Very cool. So a lot of those concepts can be applied to everyday life.
Oh, absolutely. Ambassadors are managers and leaders, and they are communicators. And I would say that, most business leaders would tell you that, and I always say it like this: communicate all you think you have to. Let your staff know everything, be open, send messages, and then communicate some more. Essentially, you can't over communicate. So,
right.
and I think that's something that really ties ambassadors and leaders in other international affairs organizations with the business community, and that's communication. You have to be able to communicate.
Absolutely. Communication is the root of really everything.
It is,
In
but
all
there has to
relationships.
be and you have to be able to communicate in a foreign language when you're an ambassador. Often, not always, because of course, not everyone can speak every language, but it's fun to be taught a foreign language, as I was taught Burmese and several others while I was in the
You
service.
speak 6 languages, from what I understand. What
I
are the
do.
6?
French and Italian. I spoke those before I entered the service.
Okay.
German, Russian, Bulgarian, and Burmese.
Very awesome. And English. So 7.
Well, yeah, okay. Yes, my English is okay.
Okay, so talking about foreign language, you've lived all over the world. How do you adapt to different cultures and kind of be a chameleon as you take on these different cultures?
Well, and that I think gets to another core skill of people who are interested in international affairs as a career, and that's what is sometimes called cross-cultural competency. It's sometimes called the 3 C's for obvious reasons. And that means that you don't have to be an expert in the rights and mores of every culture. You don't have to know what's rude in Japan, which may not be rude in France, and what's rude in Egypt or Sudan may not be rude in Denmark, but other things may be rude. But you have to have that sensitivity that allows you to watch kind of in a 360 way. I'm doing that. A 360 way, what's going on around you when you're in a foreign country. And you can sense and see how you should behave so that your behavior doesn't get in the way. And whether you are selling an American product or selling American foreign policy, you need to make sure that it's not about you. So I like to say that a diplomat never insults anyone by accident. So that means you know what is insulting and you avoid it. And there are times, of course, I never had to do this, but there are times when an ambassador might have to stand up and walk out of a meeting, for instance, if the United States was being insulted or something like that. But you would never insult somebody by accident. You have to be sensitive enough to cultural nuances that you don't do that. You have to like it. If you're lucky, you will have the language or you'll start learning it because there's no greater compliment you can pay to people than to learn to speak their language. There simply is not. In almost every country in the world, even a few phrases is a huge icebreaker. So those are some of the things, but you have to like it. I would say you have to be willing to try strange food. There's an old saying that a diplomat is someone sent abroad to eat for his or her country. There's some truth to that because you will be served some dishes that your mother never put on the table, or your father, depending on who does the cooking in your house. But so that you have to be open-minded and excited about the opportunity, but you also have to have this competence, this sensitivity that transcends simply knowing the rules in each country. If you need to know the rules in a particular country, there's a great book called Kiss, Bow, or Shake Hands. And it's a book that tells you all those little rules. But what I'm saying is that the skill you need as a diplomat goes beyond the rules of a particular society and to this larger sensitivity.
Wow, so many great points packed into that. I don't even know where to start. We have only so much time. Okay, we'll link to the book too in the show notes because that sounds like a really interesting book. you mentioned we're talking about your time abroad and in different countries. You spent time in Moscow. And so I really just have to ask, what is your opinion or your thoughts on relations between the United States and Russia right now? Where are we? What has the trend been? Where are we going?
Well, I served in Moscow in the late 1980s. In fact, I was standing on the tarmac of the airport. The name of the airport is Sheremetyevo, when Air Force One, the plane that carries the President of the United States, landed for the first time in the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union was born of a revolution that took place in 1917, yet it wasn't until 1988 that an American president set foot inside the USSR, and that president was Ronald Reagan. And he and his wife Nancy got off the plane, and there were 11 of us. We were called the country team, the ambassador, the deputy ambassador, and then the chiefs of the different sections in the embassy. And I was the chief of the economic section at the time, and I was also the only woman on the tarmac, which might have been why President Reagan stopped in front of me instead of one of the guys and said, Nancy and I so appreciate all the work that's gone into preparing our visit. I've prepared for presidential visits to other countries at other times, but I don't think anyone was ever quite that gracious as President Reagan was. But all of us had tears in our eyes because he was coming to Moscow to talk about peace with Gorbachev, essentially. So even though that was still the Soviet Union, and there were many, many bad things about the Soviet Union, the economy was a disaster, and the threat of repression, although it had been kind of cloaked in velvet, was still very much there. Nevertheless, it was a hopeful time. And then the wall came down in 1989, and the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991. And the 90s were a period of optimism about the future of Russia and Russia's relations with the West. And that didn't last. And so Putin has been in power with different titles for, 20 years now. And I am not particularly optimistic for the future of Russia itself or the future of Russia's relationships with the West, I have to say. The adventure in the Crimea, and that actually is a euphemism for the invasion of the Crimea, and Russia's effort to prevent Ukraine from solidifying its relationships with the West. These are things that will be difficult for any U.S. president to overlook. And I know that in his first phone call with Putin, President Biden did not overlook them. I think there is, however, a deep sense in Russia of loss of their empire and their influence in the world. And Russia it has nuclear weapons, which of course will always make it a member of the most exclusive and most dangerous club in international affairs. But its economy is suffering. Its demographics are terrible. Men, largely because of alcoholism, now live only to an average of 62 years of age. So I won't go on, Kashi, but I'm not really optimistic about the prospects for Russia or U.S. relations. That said, as a diplomat, I will say there are, especially with a powerful country like Russia, there are always areas where you can collaborate, even if you cannot accept their human rights record, their treatment of Navalny, of course, their treatment of protesters. There are areas where it's in the interest of the United States, and by that I mean the people of the United States, to collaborate. And a couple come to mind. Basically, cybersecurity is what I call under-diplomatized. Climate change needs every major country on board. As I said, so just because I'm not optimistic that we'll become close with Russia in the near term, that doesn't mean I think we should in any way isolate them.
Yeah. Wow. Great answer. Lots to think about too, in terms of the history and where we've come from. You mentioned being able to collaborate with someone or a country that you don't necessarily get along with and finding those nuggets. Part of your role when you were with the State Department and the White House was to help bring peace to Northern Ireland. So that was a very tense situation. Um, how do you go about brokering peace? That seems like a big task and a big job description. That's not like a bullet on your job description. That's like the thing. So,
It
how
is.
do you go about doing that? What was the process? How did you think it through? Um, how did you have success with something that was so hard?
Well, I was part of a team, and I will say that the currency that made it possible for this process to succeed was the time that President Bill Clinton was prepared to devote to it. The time of the President of the United States, whether it's phone calls or visits or just in-house discussions of policy, is actually the most valuable asset for diplomats trying to make peace. And President Clinton had made this commitment during the campaign, and basically was willing to spend the time on the phone with Irish and British leaders, and party leaders and people with dubious backgrounds, because the reason we wanted to make peace was because there was conflict, and conflict means death, and thousands of people were dying in bombings perpetrated by both sides. It's the IRA that was, in fact, seeking to change the status quo, but there were Protestant, violent groups as well. So you're stepping in the middle of a violent situation. And this is where it gets tricky, because you don't want to validate the violence by engaging with violent people, mostly men, so I'll say men, with violent men as if they were everybody else. On the other hand, you can't make peace without them. You can't, in my view, make peace only with them, and many peace agreements have suffered from the fact that they were a product of negotiations only among armed groups and communities, and largely women were left out. However, in most cases, you do need them there, particularly in cases of modern conflict, which tends to be internal. So if you're talking about the wars of the 20th century, peace is often made by diplomats after politicians tell the soldiers to stop fighting. But in these internal conflicts, you need the men with the guns, but you don't want to validate them. So that is very, very tricky. But as Yitzhak Rabin, the murdered head of Israel, once said, you don't make peace with your friends. You make it with very unsavory enemies. So you have to know the person across the table is somebody you can't, whose values you can't accept, but you have to kind of dig in anyway. So that's really hard to get over. But when we were willing to invite party leaders and people who, if they hadn't committed violence themselves, and some of them had, but were apologists for violence, we were willing to invite them even to the White House. President Clinton used, for instance, the annual St. Patrick's Day gathering to have an event where people who normally back in Belfast wouldn't talk to each other, to have them come together. So you have to get over that. You have to bring people together. And then you have to kind of cleverly, as you said, find these nuggets of common interests between the parties. So I played a very small role, but it was one of the most important things I've done. And then at the Carter Center has a conflict resolution program that has been active in some of the most difficult conflicts in the world, including Syria and Mali. So I think I should stop there, but you are right. Making peace, ending conflict is a core diplomatic responsibility. Peace is the core goal. The diplomatic instrument of national power is the primary instrument of statecraft in peacetime. And we all want to spend our lives in peacetime.
Absolutely. And so much of what you said can be applied to just life in general, about how you have to dig in, to use your term, how you have to dig in and figure out how to work with someone that you just really don't get along with, right? I mean, what's
Exactly.
more,
Not even respect. And it's all about, and that's the great thing about the Foreign Service, like the military and many other organizations. This is a mission driven organization. So it's all about the mission. And if you believe that peace is worth it, you can get your hands dirty. And that, I think, would be true in all walks of life.
Mhm. You mentioned the Carter Center, so I have to ask, could you talk a little bit about your role and what you are the most proud of from your time there? I know there's a lot to be proud of at the Carter Center, but what are you
Well, there
most proud
really
of?
is so much, and I know we don't have time, but book me for another 3 hours, and I'll talk
We'll
about
have
how
you
proud
back.
I am of the Carter Center and the work the Carter Center does. A lot of what the Carter Center does is in the health field, and I want to encourage some of the students who are listening to look at global health as a way to work globally and work in international relations. But the example I'm going to give is from the peace side. The Carter Center works in both health, neglected tropical diseases, and mental health largely, and in peace, which is an umbrella for democracy building, conflict resolution, human rights, and access to information and rule of law. I think one of the things I'm proudest of personally is the role the Carter Center played as what's called the independent observer of the implementation of the peace process in Mali. Sadly, in Mali, a country in the Sahel region of Africa, that is now on hold for political reasons. But for several years, the Carter Center was the first organization to play this role as an independent observer in an African peace process. And really, I think the first to play it in a very specific way anywhere in the world. And I think that we're going to see more and more peace agreements include the need for an independent observer who will hold the parties accountable for their implementation of the peace process. Because often when you sign the peace agreement, you think, oh, good, that's done, let's move on. But it's not, it never gets implemented. I think one of the things I'm proudest of is the way that Carter Center and its team, this was largely implemented by people other than myself, is the way they showed how this role in the future could be adapted to other conflicts and countries and could become part of conflict resolution going forward. Maybe in Sudan, but that's for the 3 hours when you invite me.
Right. That's for the next show. We'll have you back on.
Okay.
Okay. So conflict resolution, obviously a huge part of everyday life and life around the world, and how we make all of this work together.
You need to, I think that in diplomacy, you need to, when you're really a great diplomat, you try to create common interests. You uncover them if they exist. Sometimes they don't exist, then you have to create them. And that's really true in all walks of life. To get something done, you have to have a consensus, a broad consensus. You cannot make anything lasting through an order from above. You can give the order and it'll probably be obeyed if you're in the Foreign Service or the military. The minute you walk out the door, it'll be just so much paper. You really need to build consensus if you want to achieve something lasting.
Absolutely. Great leadership point too. Okay, I have a last question, and then we're going to get to all the questions that we have coming in from students. You were provost at the Naval War College. You mentioned this. What was it like serving in that role without actually being in the military and being a woman? How did you navigate that? Talking
Well,
about,
there were some challenges. But remember that the Foreign Service works closely with the military, and there are military representatives at just about every embassy. It wasn't a foreign territory to me, but I was navigating between two communities that don't, always get along. Although I'd like to think they do at the Naval War College, and that is academics, scholars, and the military, because many of the faculty members at the Naval War College are people with PhDs in political science or in history, and they have a very different worldview than people coming off of duty in Iraq or Afghanistan, which is where many of our students came from when I was the provost. But again, I credit this cross-cultural competency with the ability to swim in that particular pond. And again, we all had the same goal. We all wanted the Naval War College to educate future leaders of our national security establishment, military officers, and we had civilian students as well, including from the State Department and the CIA, to educate those future leaders in the national security sphere to be ready for the unexpected, to be agile, to be strategic, to understand what history teaches us, but not to be chained by history. So we all had the same goal, and I find that in spite of cultural differences, when people share the same goal and you can motivate people around the same goal, that matters less than you'd think, those cultural differences.
Yeah. So much of what you've talked about today is about really brokering relationships between people and conflict and like helping get over that. And such a valuable skill in life. And you've done it your whole career. So pretty cool.
Yeah.
And done it successfully, I should say, your whole career. So very, very
Nobody
cool.
is successful every day, but thank you.
You keep trying at it and you keep
at
being
it,
persistent and, eventually you find success, hopefully. Okay, so student questions are rolling in. Let's get to a few of them. Claire would like to know, how many countries have you lived in and which one was your favorite?
Okay, let's see. Germany, Burma, Russia, formerly the Soviet Union, Bulgaria, Canada, Bangladesh, Germany again. I'm missing one, I think. At 3 years each.
You lived in Paris, or no? Did you live in Paris?
Yeah, I lived in Paris as a student and in Italy. So Italy and France. So let's just say 8 or 9 I've lived in. Of course, I visited dozens and dozens more. And I would say in many ways, Myanmar, then Burma, was my favorite. It was my second posting, but it was it was out of my frame of reference when I served in Germany, which was my first posting, which was a lot of fun. But I already knew a little bit about Europe. I had studied in both France and Italy. And Burma was different. And again, I told you earlier, I had the privilege of studying the language, so I could interact. And the people were charming. Buddhism was a completely different worldview. The country was beautiful. It was a far more affluent country, sadly, back when I was there than it is now. And so it was a comfortable place to be. It was not, there are many places in the world where it's hard to be because the poverty around you that you can't always do something about is hard to take. But I would say Burma is my favorite country. Not that I like the politics or the military junta, but just as a place to explore and to get to know.
You are making me really regret the trip that did not happen in my life, where I was supposed to get to Burma and Myanmar, and it just didn't happen. So,
Kashi, don't cross it off yet. You've got plenty of time.
I've got plenty of time. I know. Post Corona, we'll figure out how to travel again.
Exactly.
But yes, definitely on my list. Okay. Related, I guess, to this question a little bit, Emma would like to know, did you ever have a situation where you felt like you were in danger while working in another country? I mean, you've been a part of a lot of different things, I have to imagine.
Oh, yes. I forgot to mention that the Foreign Service can be dangerous. It really can be. I mean, American embassies can be targeted, have been targeted. And American ambassadors can be targeted and have been targeted. I'll tell you a story. It always makes me choke up a little bit. When we were in Bangladesh, where I was ambassador, our son, whose name is Blaze, became buddies with one of the drivers of my official vehicle. So he would hang out. One day, Blaze asked the driver, why is there a guy in the front seat with a gun? Because the host government is responsible for the safety of diplomats. So in a country where you might be under threat, the government will assign a bodyguard to the US ambassador and to other people in the embassy if they are specifically under threat, which happened to us in Canada, as a matter of fact. But Mujib, which was the name of the driver, said to Blaze, "Oh, well, he's up there in case somebody tries to shoot at your mom." And my son, who was only 8 at the time, burst into tears and said, "Why would anyone want to kill my mom?" And came to me in tears, and I just realized what kind of psychological effect this constant danger could have. And I rode around in an armored vehicle. It was hard to see because the armoring kind of makes the windows smaller. And I had bodyguards wherever I went, particularly after 9/11. We were fortunate, and you put up with it. But yes, and I was also, but the time I was in most danger happened to be also in Bangladesh. There were demonstrations after the invasion of Afghanistan, and then again after the invasion of Iraq. The government actually supported the US invasion of Afghanistan, and as did almost all governments around the world. Iraq was a bit of a different story, but the people in Bangladesh saw the invasion of Afghanistan as another instance of a Western country invading a small Muslim country. So there were demonstrations, and the government, as I said, was responsible for keeping diplomats safe. So the government used to try to keep the demonstrators, and there were tens of thousands of people in these demonstrations, usually on Friday after prayers at the mosque. They would try to march to the diplomatic part of town. And the police almost always kind of intercepted them and sent the demonstration in a different direction, but sometimes not. And I remember one time when a crowd, it was estimated at many, many thousands, was standing outside the US Embassy, and they were burning me in effigy. A big paper was a woman, and so that's how I knew it was me. And then they, a big paper statue, and then they burned it outside the embassy, and they were very, very angry. And although the embassy was built to be secure, no building can withstand a determined mob if the first people across the wall are willing to take a bullet. So that was pretty scary. We were inside the embassy waiting for this crowd to disperse, and that might have been the scariest moment I had.
Yeah, I can imagine that was pretty tense.
It was.
Okay, well, I'm glad that all is better now and you survived that situation. Jay would.
And I want to just add, though, that Bangladesh was very supportive of the U.S. campaign against terrorism. This was a popular movement among people who were not experts on foreign policy. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I absolutely. Jay wants to know, let's switch gears a little bit. Jay wants to know, how did your academic studies help you in your career? It seems like a lot of what you've had to do was learn by reading about specific countries and by being there.
Well, that's exactly true. And that's either an advantage or a disadvantage of the Foreign Service, depending on your point of view. When you're assigned to a country, you may get like a 2-week class. And the Foreign Service has the Foreign Service Institute, which is where you learn your languages and you learn area studies. And you may get a couple of weeks of area studies, but you really better supplement that with your own reading. And you need to plunge in and learn. So, there is a danger. People, if you want to get to know one country very well, you should get a PhD and become a scholar. And then you write the books that the Foreign Service people read, because you sometimes, if you specialize in a country that's big enough, say China, you are likely to be sent back several times during your career, but you won't spend every overseas post in China. So if you're assigned to Ghana, for instance, you need to have this ability and this desire to read about Ghana, learn about Ghana, get to know people in Ghana, and understand enough about how Ghana works to keep Washington educated on that. So he's absolutely right. Was it Jay? Jay is absolutely right. And you tend to be a mile wide and an inch deep, but everybody's aware of this danger, so you just keep learning.
And so, related to your academic studies, are you saying that this academic curiosity and desire for learning is what you took from school?
Well, first of all, yeah, I do believe that a background in history is a good background, but there are many backgrounds that could be useful for the Foreign Service. And my master's program at Johns Hopkins, SICE, it's called, had courses that did certainly prepare me. Economics courses on how the world economic system works, and comparative government classes. I mean, you do need to know some basic infrastructure, how different countries are governed. What's the difference between our presidential system and a parliamentary system? What's the IMF? How does world trade work? Who governs it? All that stuff, that global architecture is something you probably should enter knowing a fair bit about.
Absolutely. Alice would like to know, who was our best Secretary of State?
Well, a lot of people would say James Baker because he was George H.W. Bush's Secretary of State, and he presided over really two incredible foreign policy achievements that were the culmination of many decades of work, but nevertheless, he was on the spot. And one was the reunification of Germany, and the other was the first Gulf War, which was effective precisely because we had 30 some partners in the military campaign. And even though some people in the US criticized this decision, we did not go on to Baghdad. We declared we had a limited purpose in that action, which was to force Iraq to leave Kuwait, which they had invaded. And the invasion was clearly illegal under international law. And Kuwait, clearly, little country, didn't have the wherewithal to defend itself. So some people would say James Baker. I think I always, we didn't get a lot of resources to establish embassies in the countries that were liberated by the end of the Cold War, the former republics of the Soviet Union, and to grow the embassies in Eastern Europe and the countries of the former Yugoslavia. So I always thought that was an error, but many people would say James Baker. George Shultz recently passed away. You can read a lot about him. I would say he was another excellent Secretary of State. And then Madeleine Albright is the one I served under and knew best. And I have only the greatest respect for Madeleine Albright, who is brilliant and who did some great work with security architecture, NATO, Kosovo, and other things as the Secretary of State. I was not in the State Department when Hillary Clinton was the secretary, so I can't speak to that. But those are some of the highlights.
Yeah. Leah would like to know if you could do something differently early. Okay. If you could do something different early in your career, what would it be?
I think it would be to understand more about this need for interpersonal consensus. I think I did. A lot of the things I worked on required working with other parts of the State Department and other agencies of the US government. So you learn it, by doing. But I think I should have been more self-aware about some of the, basically precepts of good leadership and management, even before I was managing anything except myself. I probably would have read more widely in that space. That's one thing. Yeah, that's one thing.
Yeah, interesting. Sonam would like to know, what is President Carter like?
He's amazing. First of all, he is smart as a whip. He has these twinkly blue eyes. I don't know if he'd like to hear me say that, because he also has the gravitas of a former president, and he's a power. He's a power to be reckoned with, but he has twinkly blue eyes. And the twinkle in them really reflects his extraordinary intelligence. He is also somebody who is deeply committed to human rights and to alleviating suffering around the world, which is why he and Mrs. Carter established the Carter Center. But he really was all in. He has done so much for millions of people. But what he's like is funny and quick and extraordinarily intelligent and
Absolutely.
committed. You all know he's committed, though, and he's a heck of a
still
carpenter.
going.
He can do anything. He can he can bring home a turkey for Thanksgiving dinner. In fact, he has a competition with his Secret Service detail on, who can shoot the most turkeys during the season. And he's a wonderful carpenter. He builds beautiful pieces of furniture. He used to be a very valuable member of the team at Habitat for Humanity because he's one of the few volunteers on the site who actually could build a house without, by himself.
And he used to race to see if they could get theirs done before everybody else's, right?
Yeah, but he's a demon on quality too. There's a story, and I don't know whether it's true, that on one build, he wasn't really satisfied with the work some of the volunteers had done during the day on some of the framing. And so after everybody knocked off at 5:00, he stayed and fixed the whole thing himself. Don't know if it's true, but that's one of the stories.
I'd like to choose to believe that.
It could be true. It could be true. Yeah.
I choose to believe that. Okay. We have a lot more questions, but we're just going to take one more because we have exhausted our time today. Willow, this is a good question to end on. Willow wants to know, have you ever taken a break? Do you get balance?
I did. Yeah, in 1988, when I got married, I was between posts. And normally when you leave a post, I was leaving Moscow. I married an American I met there, by the way. And I was on my way back to Washington. Normally the office you're going to wants you yesterday. But this time I was able to negotiate like 5 weeks because you get vacation. You always have vacation in the bank because you can never take your vacation because you're always busy. But I was able to get a nice long break for a honeymoon. So I have to say, unlike many Foreign Service officers, I had a nice long honeymoon in the summer of 1988. Now, and I did leave the Carter Center in June, but I'm working at Georgia State and I'm on some nonprofit boards. But I do think balance is absolutely important. And I will say that I don't bring work home. That might mean I stayed at the office late. Back in the day, I never brought classified information home. It's a big mistake. It's also illegal, but it's a big mistake anyway. So I would stay at the embassy till I was done. But once I got home, I was all there. So I would say do that. Put your work behind you. Try not to bring it home. If you have to work Saturday, fine. Work Saturday. Go home Saturday afternoon and spend the rest of the weekend, with your family. But it's, thanks for asking, Willow.
Yeah. I really hope that over 30 years ago wasn't your last vacation.
No, it wasn't my last vacation. It was just something that I always was proud of, that I was able to engineer a nice long honeymoon. But it is a place where there's maybe an excessive expectation of long hours. Long hours don't always equate to efficiency. So you have to be careful about that too.
Absolutely. Okay, everyone, we're out of time today. That's our show. So you know how to find us everywhere on the web, supernovacommence.com, #supernovacommence. We make it really easy. Please sign up for the mailing list. We have all kinds of really cool opportunities for you. Internships and grants and some cool things. So sign up for the mailing list. Next week, we're going to continue our amazing shows. And we have a guest, Duria Faruqi. She was the past president of supply chain innovation at Georgia Pacific. So we're going to be talking about manufacturing and supply chain and all kinds of cool things. And she's also the past COO of City of Atlanta. So it's going to be a great show. Ambassador Peters, do you have any parting words for our students today?
No, well, yes, I do. Whatever you decide to do for a career, stay engaged in the world. The world is very small, as COVID is showing us, and it's also a very exciting place. And I can't think of anything more valuable to do with your life then understand in a large way what it means to be a human being on this planet.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for being here. Students, have a great week. Please make the most of your time, whether you're in person or you're virtual right now. It does not matter. You can still make the most of whatever you're doing. And remember, it's a blessing to be a blessing. So be kind to people as you go through your day today and your week, and stay safe and healthy. And we'll see you guys next week. Bye.
Bye.